Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're embarking on a genuinely fascinating journey into the very blueprint of life on Earth. I mean, just imagine walking outside and looking at millions, actually billions of different plants, animals, insects, and tiny microscopic organisms. It's just an overwhelming amount of biological chaos out there. So our mission in this analysis is to uncover the incredible scientific framework that actually brings order to all of this boundless diversity. We're going to demystify taxonomy, breaking down exactly how science maps out the entire living world. Which begs a pretty massive question, right? How on earth do scientists actually organize millions of unique species without just descending into total confusion? Well, the very first real scientific solution came from a brilliantly meticulous Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus. Today, we know him as the father of modern taxonomy. Basically, he looked at the sheer chaos of nature and decided, you know what? This desperately needs a filing system. So here's our roadmap for today's journey. First, organizing nature's chaos. Second, the Five Kingdoms system. Third, Monrea, the prokaryotic pioneers. Fourth, Protista and algae. Fifth, fungi as decomposers. And finally, symbiosis. Section 1. Organizing nature's chaos. Okay, let's dive right into this. This part is all about establishing the ground rules, literally the very foundation of how we categorize life, all thanks to Linnaeus. Now, Linnaeus's absolute stroke of genius was inventing what we call binomial nomenclature. I know, it sounds super complex, but it's really just a two-term naming system. He decided that in the scientific world, absolutely every organism needs a specific two-part name. The first word represents the broad genus, and the second word is the specific species. Just look at us humans as the prime example. Homo is our broad genus, and sapiens is our exact species. It was a total game changer because it gave scientists a universal language. But he didn't stop at just naming things. No, he created an entire top-down hierarchy. You can actually think of this taxonomic hierarchy exactly like military ranks. You start at the very top with the kingdom. That's your high-ranking, broad general in command of the whole shebang. Then you filter down through phylum, class, order, family, genus, all the way down to the species. The species is basically the individual foot soldier on the ground. So the really crucial point here is understanding what that foot soldier actually represents in the real world. You might be wondering, is a species just some artificial concept we invented on paper? Not at all. It is a very real, hard biological boundary. A species is strictly defined as a group of organisms that can naturally interbreed and produce healthy, fertile offspring. If they can reproduce together naturally, boom, they belong to the same species. It's really nature's own built-in categorization line. Section 2, the Five Kingdom system. So Linnaeus gave us a phenomenal foundation, right? Originally, he just split the world into plants and animals. But as you know, science loves a good plot twist, and a massive technological leap was about to completely break his two-kingdom rule. And that plot twist was the invention and evolution of the microscope. Suddenly, scientists were looking through these lenses and finding totally bizarre organisms that were definitely not plants and definitely not animals. This growing mountain of microscopic evidence led ecologist R.H. Whitaker back in 1969 to propose a revolutionary new framework. Two kingdoms simply weren't going to cut it anymore. Whitaker completely expanded the map into the five kingdoms: Monera, Partista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. This brilliant new system didn't just look at an organism's outward appearance anymore. Instead, it categorized life based on internal cellular complexity, how the body is actually organized, and, critically, how the organism consumes its food. Section 3, Monera, the prokaryotic pioneers. Let's start at the very beginning of Whitaker's list with the most primitive kingdom. These are the prokaryotic pioneers that really represent the raw early stages of life on Earth. And this brilliantly illustrates the defining trait of Monera. They are prokaryotic. Now, that doesn't just mean old. Technically, it means their cells do not have a neatly organized nucleus. Their DNA is just kind of floating freely in the cellular fluid, totally unprotected by a membrane. And because they lack complex internal structures like chloroplasts, they've actually developed incredible biological workarounds. For instance, some bacteria used pigments scattered right in their outer membrane to photosynthesize. They just completely bypass the need for a complex internal factory. How cool is that? Which brings us to an absolutely mind-blowing anomaly within Monera, mycoplasma. This is literally the smallest free-living organism in the entire world, and it has a wildly fascinating structural quirk. It completely lacks a cell wall. Now, why does this matter? Well, famous antibiotics, like penicillin, for example, work specifically by destroying a bacteria's cell wall. So by lacking one entirely, this tiny microscopic organism is practically invincible to those drugs. It is a stunning example of how a biological missing piece actually becomes an ultimate survival superpower. Monera also hosts some of the most extreme survivors on the planet. Take methanogens. These are ancient archaea that thrive in swamps or even the stomachs of cows. They are strictly anaerobic, meaning oxygen is literally poison to them, and they actually burp out methane gas. On the complete other end of the spectrum, we have brilliant collaborators like Rhizobium. You can think of Rhizobium as a bacterial roommate living in the roots of plants. It pulls nitrogen right out of the air and pays rent to the plant in the form of usable nutrients, while the plant provides a safe home and a bunch of sugar. It's a win-win. Section 4, Protista and the algae. So if Monera was the raw prototype of life, Protista is the great eukaryotic upgrade, bringing much stronger cellular management to the table. Let's focus on this group's most famous members, algae. You might look at green algae and wonder, why aren't these just called plants? I mean, they photosynthesize, right? Well, true plants need a complex internal plumbing system, tissues called xylem and phloem, to fight gravity and pump water from deep roots all the way up to their leaves. Algae, on the other hand, live suspended in water. They don't need to fight gravity. Their entire body, which is called a thallus, just acts like a giant sponge, soaking up nutrients directly from the water around them. Oh, and here's a really fun memory trick from our source for your next exam. The study of algae is called phycology. The source notes that phyco sounds a lot like the word for slipping in some languages, which is exactly what happens when you accidentally step on wet algae. Algae are beautifully categorized by color, and this directly corresponds to how deep they live in the ocean. We have green, brown, and red. Red algae, remember R for rhodophysia, live the absolute deepest. Why is that? Because their specific red pigment is uniquely capable of absorbing the blue light that penetrates down into the darkest, deepest ocean layers. And to reproduce and spread across these vast waters, they create motile spores called zoospores. Just think of moving animals in a zoo. Section 5, Fungi. Nature's great decomposers. Now, what's really interesting about this next section is we move to a kingdom that looks exactly like plants, but behaves completely differently. Fungi do not photosynthesize. They are heterotrophs, meaning they actually have to go find food. But they don't have mouths to swallow it. Instead, they use a bizarre, almost out-of-body digestion process. First, they secrete these powerful digestive enzymes outside their bodies directly onto dead organic matter. Those enzymes break the matter down into a nutrient soup, and then the fungus simply acts like a sponge, absorbing that pre-digested liquid right up. And because fungi live by aggressively pushing their way into decaying wood and really harsh environments, standard plant cell walls made of cellulose just wouldn't cut it. So nature gave them a heavy-duty evolutionary armor upgrade, chitin. This is literally the exact same ultra-tough material that makes up the exoskeletons of insects. Let's lock in some quick naming rules while we're here, too. The study of fungi is mycology. Just think, my God, look at that mold. Common yeast belongs to the Ascomycetes. Think of how the Y and A sounds kind of connect. And mushrooms, which always sprout up from a strong base, belong to the Basidiomycetes. Pretty easy to remember, right? Section 6, Symbiosis and Bioindicators. For our final section today, we are going to look at how these rigid taxonomic kingdoms actually blur the lines to master the art of survival through collaboration. Because one of the most absolutely vital partnerships on Earth is mycorrhiza. It's essentially an underground roommate deal between fungi and higher plants, like pine trees. The fungus shoots its microscopic threads incredibly deep and wide into the soil, acting as this massive net to gather rare water and minerals for the tree. In exchange, the tree performs photosynthesis and feeds the fungus sweet, sugary carbs. Honestly, many of the great forests on this planet simply could not survive without this invisible underground fungal network holding them all up. But the absolute masterclass in extreme biological synergy has to be the lichen. A lichen isn't actually a single organism at all. It is a stunning microfarming miracle created when a fungus and an algae team up. The fungus acts as the architect. It builds a tough, protective housing structure that traps moisture. And inside that safe, damp house, the algae acts as the chef, happily photosynthesizing and cooking up enough food for both of them. It's a perfect system. But this incredible synergy also brings us to a critical modern-day reality check. Because lichens don't have roots, they must absorb all their moisture and nutrients directly from the air around them. This means they are extraordinarily sensitive to air pollution, particularly sulfur dioxide. If the air turns toxic, the lichens are the very first things to die off. So as we look at this vast, beautifully categorized web of life, we really have to ask ourselves, if the disappearance of a tiny, rootless lichen acts as a glaring ecological fire alarm for rising pollution, what other invisible threads in Linnaeus's grand framework are we pulling apart without even realizing it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.